right, hello everyone. I think we are, most of us are here. We might have one more addition to the panel, but thanks for coming today. I'm the steward for this panel. It is Duopoly Disentrenchment or Disentrenchment, depending on how you read it in the program. And they might have very different meanings, but we're gonna go with what we think they meant to say. Disentrenchment.
Talking about threnching, that's a late night panel.
Yeah, exactly. That's the last panel. So all of us here, I think, have had some role in duopoly disentrenchment, so maybe we can just go around and introduce ourselves first. I'm Nick Brana. I was a senior advisor to Bobby Kennedy in his run for president just now, and also the ballot access director. And before that, I worked for Bernie Sanders in 2016, his presidential run, lobbied the superdelegates for him, and then founded the People's Party. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much. I'm Lucy Caldwell. I'm a senior advisor to the Forward Party. I came up in Republican politics, not because everything about the Republican platform appealed to me, but it was because I wanted to get things done. And at the time, that was the vehicle that made the most sense for my policies and issues I wanted to advocate for. And over time, I really saw the Republican Party fall away from something that I wanted to be a part of. And even before the election and even the primary victory of Donald Trump in 2016, who is a person that I think is an existential threat to our democracy, I felt strongly that increasingly the Republican Party did not represent me. And when I looked at the number of presidential candidates in 2016, very few of them were people that I could support, and so I became an independent. At the same time, I was running a tech startup. I was a chief strategy officer of a tech startup called CrowdScout, and it was a data management and marketing platform for campaigns, nonprofits, issue advocacy groups. It was a nonpartisan platform, which is actually very hard to sell into politics as a nonpartisan, because there is so much pressure for tools themselves to be partisan, and there are good and bad reasons why. So because at that time the Republican Party was fairly underserved in the market, after 2012, the Republican Party had been very, very embarrassed on the data and technology infrastructure piece. We had a lot of Republican clients. We had 7 of the 17 Republican primary presidential candidates in 2016. We had the RNC. We had several of the other committees. I was really seeing firsthand how the sausage was getting made in terms of especially field infrastructure on the Republican side. And so when we sold that company at the end of 2018, early 2019, I was at this point quite disaffected, but also quite horrified by what was going on in the Republican Party. And I went to some of my friends who were leaders of the Never Trump movement, and I said, is there something I could do to help you? Like, you know, I know you're thinking about fielding a primary challenger to Trump this year. Can I help you think about, you know, the data strategy? And one of them said, have you ever heard of a guy named Joe Walsh? And I said, I don't know who that is. And some months later, I was in Iowa running Joe Walsh's long shot campaign against Donald Trump. For those who don't know, Joe Walsh is a former Tea Party congressman turned Never Trumper, still a rock-ribbed conservative guy, but a person who is using his large platform now to speak out from his voice, which is now the voice of an independent voter, against the threat of Trumpism as he sees it. Because Joe, who has different politics than mine, you know, likewise felt abandoned by his party. And so after that experience, I looked around and I thought, we need more levers. It's not realistic to just think that I could convince people to just vote against the Republican Party. We have to be able to do more than that, and these times are really urgent. And so when the new Forward Party began constituting itself, I remember there was 3 legacy organizations. It was the Renew America movement, which was a lot of people who were kind of the way I was, never Trump types. It was the Serve America movement, which was a cross-partisan group that was really working hard at the party piece of things. And then it was the Legacy Forward Party led by my friends Andrew Yang and Matt Shinners. And so one of the board members of RAM at the time was a guy named Charlie Sykes, who's a person who's a pretty well-known media personality. And I was on the phone with Charlie, and he told me that he was going to be voting on whether or not RAM should merge, whether this merger should happen. And he said, Lucy, do you think it's a good idea? And I said, I have no idea if it's a good idea, Charlie. I just know it's the only idea. We need more levers for independent voters and independent voices. And so I'm really, really proud of the work that I've been able to do with Forward over the last going on 3 years. And I'm excited to have this conversation, even though I think there are some quite varied views up here on this stage. And I'm excited because I think in this panel, we're really going to be able to talk about some of the true hurdles that exist for taking on entrenchment in our politics, and what we can do beyond candidates or structural reforms. How can we build infrastructure for more people to have a voice and really to build something lasting that a lot of people could plug into? So I know that's a little long, but that's how I come to this work.
No, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Paul Rossi. I'm legal counsel for the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign. Still am, actually. So we're still fighting ballot challenges. We're about to go to the U.S. Supreme Court on one of the issues that, the only issue that we lost on so far was the New York issue with respect to what address Bobby had to use on his ballot access petitions. And I won't get into that. That will bore everyone in this room. But I got started in this. I also am a lifelong Republican. I remember as a 12-year-old watching Ronald Reagan give his acceptance speech at Detroit Convention. That's the moment I became a Republican. He just spoke to me. But as I went through law school and as we move forward, Lucy's correct. The Republican Party has slipped away in many important aspects from, at least the elite of the party has grown away from the voting base of the Republican Party, and that's pretty evident. I think the same can be said for the Democratic Party as well. Their elites do not represent the mainline Democrats anymore. I think you can see that in Bobby's breaking away from the Democrat Party. His own party doesn't even speak to him any longer. So I think there's a disconnect between the Republican and Democratic elites and their voters, and they were never connected to the broader independent movement in this country. So I think there has got to be some kind of formulation of a strategy which connects the normal Republican and Democratic voters on a common cause. And I think there is a common agenda out there that can be cobbled together, which essentially is the independent agenda, quite frankly, to move America forward and to get rid of the Republican and Democratic elites that run their respective parties. I got into the independent movement. I was called upon to defend the Libertarian Party's nomination papers in Pennsylvania in 2012, Gary Johnson. And the Republican Party challenged 46,000 of their 58,000 signatures that they filed. I was a little bit naive. I walked in with my little briefcase, and I walked in a room where the Republicans had an entire room of computers and staff because they had never lost a ballot access challenge. But slowly but surely, we worked through the issues. We took a couple issues to the PA Supreme Court. We won those issues. And I was the first attorney who was able to defend a third-party ballot access petition in Pennsylvania against a Republican challenge. So we succeeded in that in 2012. And from there, I became involved in the broader ballot access effort. And I think a lot of the ways that the parties entrench themselves is through the ballot access rules that they have in the ballot access in the election codes throughout the country. And so I'm working to strike those down one by one. The Kennedy campaign gave us an opportunity to strike down several of them, and we were successful in all of that. So we've done some really good work there. But there's a lot of work left to be done. And to do that, you need a plaintiff. You need somebody with standing to challenge a ballot access rule. So if anybody is out there who is in a state with a particularly obnoxious ballot access rule, I'm happy to help you guys out. So that's what I'm up to. And I also, by the way, helped out Rocky De La Fuente, but that's a darker side of my practice. But he was a good guy. He wanted to spend a lot of money to get on ballots, but didn't want to campaign very much. But I'm not sure why you would ever want to do that. But I helped him out as well. He knocked out some ballot access rules as well. So you can thank him for a couple ballot access wins across the country back in 2016 and 2020. So that's what I'm here for.
Just before we go on, I'll say about Paul. Paul really sells himself short. I see Tracy there. Tracy was our deputy elected director on the Kennedy campaign. Lots of people from the Kennedy campaign. It's great to see you. Paul really is, I think, the best ballot access attorney in the country. There's probably only one person, Oliver Hall, that maybe gives him a run for his money. But other than that, and maybe Richard Winger, but he's not an attorney. He's the nation's top ballot access expert.
Richard should be an attorney. He has such a rock-solid memory. If there's ever a legal question I actually am stumped on, I go to Richard. He says, "Oh, of course, there's this case back in 1960 that said this." Like, thank you, Richard. It's like saved me about 40 hours of research. So, but Oliver Hall is also a fantastic ballot access attorney. I would say he's the cream of the cream as well. So, absolutely.
And Ron.
It's great that you bring up Richard Winger because, I mean, it's small world.
We can't have this panel without bringing him up.
Yeah, he should be here.
I'm so happy. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a longtime Democrat, 30 plus years, probably since 1988, and former Democratic elected official from Colorado. So those of you from Colorado, as a state representative, state senator, thank you. But I was an accident. I wasn't supposed to get in office. So I was one of these people that was never supposed to win. But I was a reformer when I ran against two older people who split the vote. And the young guy who kind of stacked the committee with students, that was me, college kids up at CU Boulder. I was president of the College Democrats at that time. I won by one vote in a appointment, vacancy. And then was concerned I'd get a primary by older people, never did. So stayed in for 6 years. An opening happened in the state Senate, and then I got in the state Senate. I was there for 8 years. So we have term limits in Colorado. But the reason I bring up Richard Winger and why I'm here and why I'm glad you're here and why this is important for us to be here, and it's thrilling to hear the background and the different perspectives that everybody brings to the table, is my first bill in 1995. I got appointed in 1994. So 1995, Richard Winger helped me draft the legislation that allowed ballot access for unaffiliated candidates in the state of Colorado. I was the only freshman Democrat that passed a law that year. All the other Republicans, we used to be a red state. I don't know if you know that. We're a blue state now. We were red, staunchly red. And the Republicans here would just kill your bills just routinely, just because they could do it. So they'd kill your bill, they love your idea, they bring it back as a Republican idea. They killed all the Democratic freshman bills. They all died. I was one of like 4 Democratic freshmen. All bills dead. The only reason that bill passed was because that bill had to pass. Any libertarians in there? Yeah. The libertarians said, "Hey, Tupa, we want you to carry this bill for ballot access. We're suing the state of Colorado. We got a favorable court ruling. Will you change the law?" I said, "Hell yeah, I'll change the law. We need more voices in this process." So just going back to the whole thing. I was a reformer even as a Democrat, and I'm the left-leaning type of Democrat. Not a liberal. I'm a progressive. Progress. I want to move forward. I want to solve problems. But I take a left-leaning approach to that. Can I work with a Republican? Of course I could work with a Republican. If we can move the ball forward, I will do that and not compromise my principles. A lot of people say, well, you got to compromise your principles. Like, no, I think that's the problem in politics, and that's why people don't like politicians. You're compromising all your principles. I don't do that. I'm running for Congress as an independent in CD7, so just west of Denver and then south, so CD7. And I'm running as an independent because after 30 years of being a Democrat, seeing what happened with the Republican Party, losing a lot of friends when Trump kind of took it over. And I don't know if you're big Trump fans out there in the audience, but I'm not a Trump fan. But a lot of my Republican friends said that's a bridge too far. I'm not going to do the Trump thing. So they got out of the party. And I stayed in the Democratic Party thinking, well, okay, I'm on the inside. I can reform it from the inside like we all think we can do. And then you just realize the money in this system and the corporate control and the special interest groups and all the power structure in it, it doesn't want to be reformed. You will never reform this system from the inside. And anybody who says you can, you know, people on the right, people on the left, AOC or people, you know, Massey or whoever's on the right, they're just lying. I mean, it's a lie. It's a hoax. They're just going to say something to you to make you feel good. you will never see real reform. You will never see term limits. You will never see campaign finance reform. You will never see lobbyist reform. You won't see any of that stuff. It has to happen from the outside. So, as the Democratic Party drifted more and more to the left with all this corporate control, et cetera, I got disgusted with the whole Joe Biden, we will never have a primary, I'm going to squish all the voices. You know, Kennedy was back then a Democrat, and I supported what he was doing. I said, hell yeah, run against this guy. Democrats, predictably, made it very difficult in every single state. And here's the secret. They have an inexhaustible amount of money. They have $1 billion. They have $10 billion if they need it. You remember the John Ossoff, Senator Ossoff race? Remember his race as a representative in Georgia? It's Georgia, right?
Yes, Georgia.
Yep.
You know how much money he raised for a congressman race in Georgia? Do you know how much money he raised? $80 million. You know how much the Republican raised who won that seat? $90 million for a congressional seat. Do you know why they raised all that money? This was after Trump got elected, and this was when the whole nation was divided. Is this a Trump agenda? Is it a Democratic agenda? What is it? There could have been $1 billion given to both of those men for that race. $1 billion. So when we're talking about what we're up against, as a reformer, as an independent, doing what we're doing, it's an inexhaustible amount of money that we are up against. And I'm not saying we need to match that. As someone who's been in office for 14 years and now running as an independent, you don't need to match that money. You just need enough money to be viable. Just enough to get your name out so people look at you and give you a second glance and say, I'm being inundated with all of these ads from everybody else, but I like this guy who I just barely heard about. I want to know more. And that's it. You just need a little, just enough money.
Completely agree. I think the advantages, we've already talked a number of advantages, each of us from our own area of expertise, that the duopoly has over independence. And that includes big money, unlimited amounts of money, unlimited amounts of ad airtime, different forms of tech and digital infrastructure that we don't have in the independent movement. I would say also what you touched on, Lucy, is kind of a consolidation that exists within the kind of digital and tech infrastructure that doesn't exist in the independent sector. You know, we don't have those, we don't have, you know, WinRed, Act Blue, NGP Van, that kind of stuff, and ballot access, of course. You know, the ballot access restrictions. So these are all different areas, I think, you know, that we can each talk more to.
Well, I think I would say, hearing everything that's on this stage, I would encourage us, I think, to try to stay away from language of otherism, like language, Ron, respectfully, that people, for example, AOC or others, that they are deliberately lying to people about this. Because I do think that language like that is not the kind of language that will bring people into the fold of coming out of the two parties. I think that we can approach the entrenchment in our system of thinking, wow, you know what major parties are? Actually, they are basically like private country clubs that have managed to get themselves special privilege in our government, right? You guys are talking a bit about how the Democratic primary was handled this year in the presidential cycle. Similarly, in the 2020 cycle, all of the Republican presidential primaries were canceled across the country in many places. You know, I'm hearing complaints that Joe Biden wouldn't participate in debates, for example. Donald Trump also, as recently as this cycle, would not participate in debates. So we can acknowledge that on both sides of the aisle, there are these conditions that exist, and they exist because we have a system that can only be solved by some of those structural reforms that you're talking about. Because, you know, ultimately, people will throw around terms about things each of the parties are doing, and they will say, that's anti-democratic. Well, it might feel that way to you culturally, but technically, it actually isn't. It can be a thing that we think is very bad, but it is actually like a private party just doing, you know, like you don't want that person in your home, you can ask them to leave, right? And so I think helping educate people on the fact that that is actually the reality of what the parties are. I think to the infrastructure point, that's a really important one, and it's really part of why the Forward Party has decided to build as a party. Because, for example, you know, I will say candidly, and I'm looking out and I'm seeing a lot of Kennedy shirts. I am absolutely opposed to Bobby Kennedy. He is so far out of any kind of candidacy that I personally would ever be comfortable with. And I'm an independent voter, and we can all choose different things, right? But I think it's right to acknowledge that not all independent voters are Kennedy voters. He is super far outside of an Overton window that I would ever be comfortable with, whether he had an R, a D, an I, or an F for forward behind his name. And that's okay, right? Independent voters are not a monolith, and that's part of what makes it hard to bring independents together. It's part of why the idea of an independent movement in and of itself, and there are people who've been at this a lot longer than I, is almost a little bit of an oxymoron, right? Because yes, there are many of us out there, many of us are independents, but we don't all have the same views. It's like in a poll where you will poll like generic Democrat or generic Republican, and then they're polling so well, and then one of them gets into the race and their numbers fall apart. That's because the people who were being polled, Democratic primary voters or Republicans, who they were imagining is different than who someone else was imagining, and so on and so forth. One of the things that Forward has recognized is that parties have the ability to do things that independent voters, or independent candidates, excuse me, cannot scale and keep going, right? There's a meme that is like, you know that brand Some E-Cards? There's a meme that you guys have probably seen. It's really old. I'm kind of dating myself. This is like early internet memes where it shows a guy throwing up his hands and there are a bunch of papers and it's like, F this o'clock sort of thing, right? That's what happens at the end of a campaign, right? Like a candidate is like exhausted, right? All of what we've learned from that campaign goes away, right? And if a candidate is running only as an independent, as a strict independent, in most cases, their ballot access goes away, right? And it is true that in a lot of states, it's harder for an independent to get on the ballot than a Republican or a Democrat, or even in some cases, other parties. There are a couple of states like Pennsylvania that actually, thanks to the courts, make it quite easy, but it's very hard as an independent. And so Forward has the ability to build lasting infrastructure that future candidates can tap into by not taking a top-down approach and being pluralistic in the types of candidates that Forward would be willing to endorse or welcome into the fold and promote as Forward candidates, and really the ability to set up long-term infrastructure. Candidates need things like access to voter data, right? And going down to the county and getting your county voter roll is not going to cut it. Because when we talk about voter data, we're talking about a base file of voters that has been massively enhanced by things like Experian data or other types of data where you can slice and dice demographics and who are these people. Both parties have data sets that are being enhanced by their candidates and campaigns that are out on the field. You mentioned Win Red and Act Blue. That's like when you go to a candidate's page and it's like, we already have your credit card info, right? Probably the friction's a little reduced. You know, we need things like door knocking apps. We need the basic infrastructure, the ability to reserve media, all those kinds of things. So that's what Forward is building for those reasons. There are, in my opinion, major structural advantages to building through a party ecosystem as opposed to just, you know, every cycle there's an independent candidate and then that candidate wins, loses, whatever, but we have lost a lot of that infrastructure. And, go ahead.
Well, Team Kennedy is actually staying intact, and all of the experience that we have cobbled together, and the voter base, and we have that technology in Team Kennedy, and we are actually keeping that intact for the future, for whatever comes forward with respect to any other candidate, with respect to supporting other independent candidates, or even maybe Bobby in the future. That hasn't been decided yet, but so that's why Team
Every
Kennedy,
candidate believes they're keeping their infrastructure intact.
But they're
you guys have a billionaire backer and a billionaire vice presidential candidate, so you do have more backing, so you may have more success.
I didn't come up onto this panel to have a debate with Forward. But
No,
I'm just simply, fair enough.
I'm not.
But I will say,
I
will say, I agree with you. There is a need to move from election to election to keep technology intact, which is why Team Kennedy is staying intact and keeping and has the resources to maintain what we have learned over the last 10 months moving forward, and also the voter databases. That's important. I think the technology that is one of the key problems with independents, is that they do move on from campaign to campaign. They have to start from scratch, and we do have to have some kind of 1 or 2 or 3 different platforms that does maintain the technological knowledge, and because that takes a long time to build up. And it's like you said, there's a layering over time that makes that database and that technology better and better over time to start to be able to compete with the Democrats and Republicans. So you're right. So what I'm saying is that we are also doing that with Team Kennedy for the future, precisely for that purpose.
Yeah. Respectfully, I don't think it's ever going to work to build infrastructure around a single person.
I didn't say for a single person.
Well, you said
we
for
don't
the
know,
future.
we don't know
Bobby.
that it's going to be
I mean,
Bobby
I think
in the future.
calling it Team Kennedy, right? I just respectfully,
that's the name of the organization.
The more,
so.
okay, I'm not here to. I think structurally, the more that we can build structures, data, technology, infrastructure, and ballot access that feels like it's built from the ground up. You know, Forward is focused on things like local school board races, right? Like building county parties, we have ballot access here in Colorado. We have an amazing executive committee here in Colorado. They went out and they got ballot access, right? So the more that we can get real humans, the more we can, it is, of course, sometimes you need paid signature gatherers, but the more we can really invest in local infrastructure and have a lot of voices, right? And there's no doubting that, of course, Kennedy has incredible name ID that Forward will never have. But the ability to build long-term community and build it around a range of views, you know, that's part of what really, I think, is exciting about the Forward model.
I remember when Ross Perot ran, as my father voted for the first politician ever. My dad voted for Ross Perot in 1992, and he got 23% of the vote in the state of Colorado. 1 out of every 4 people voted for Ross Perot. He got 19% across the country. Did much worse the next time, half that. But I was disappointed. I was in office at the time. I was disappointed that the Reform Party didn't have more staying power, because I would have loved to have been a part of something like that as a reformer. I agree with Lucy, whatever Lucy is saying about the economies of scale, that we need to do that. The problem right now is that Forward's doing their thing, Kennedy's doing their thing, I'm Unity Party, we're doing our thing, Green's doing their thing, Libertarians doing our thing. And what do we all have in common? We're not the 2 major parties that everybody doesn't like. That's the only thing we have in common. But if we can crystallize or harness or whatever you want to call it, if we can unify around a couple themes, thematic issues that unify us all in this room, one of which might be, I'm not a big advocate of this, but I'm okay with it. If people want it, term limits, fine. But the second thing, Kennedy's on it, Jill Stein is on it, Donald Trump is not on it, but I mean, anyone but the 2 parties is on, getting corporate control and special interest control out of politics. I mean, it seems to be something that we can all begin there and take, vows. If I ever get into office, I will never become a lobbyist, or whatever the hell it would be. But the public likes that. The public says, fine, I'd rather go with this person than that person.
But you know what the problem, you know what's so hard, and I don't have an answer to it? This is a thing that we've talked a lot about in the formation of Forward. How you want to build a big enough container that it can fit a lot of people. But you also want that container to be small enough that it's meaningful. So if I said to everyone in this stage, like, who likes vanilla ice cream? Like, how many people here like vanilla ice cream? Probably most of you are like, yeah, vanilla ice cream's okay. But if we walked out and there were, there was an ice cream shop right out, and it's like, ice cream's on me. Paul thinks I was such a jerk on this panel. I'm going to atone. I'm going to buy all of you ice cream. I bet you, if every flavor were available to you, many of you would not choose vanilla, right? So the fact that we all like vanilla ice cream does not mean that when we get to the ice cream shop, we're all going to pick ice cream together, right? So yes, maybe someone likes term limits, but who knows? Maybe there's some issue that's more activating. So I think thinking about how to unite people around shared values, right, of pluralism, and also of resourcing, and And yes, there are things that we can absolutely agree are force multipliers in a movement, right? Like certain structural reforms that would make our politics more competitive, breaking down laws that are obviously very unfair to independents. Like in my home state of Arizona, it's almost impossible to get on the ballot as an independent. It is very easy to get on as a Republican. You have a higher threshold, right? That's insane. But I think it is very hard to find what is that thing that not only everyone agrees upon, but that everyone is going to agree on so much that they want to hang together. And so that's part of our challenge that I think we
I
have.
think.
Let me just
Yeah, go ahead.
a quick response. I get it. I mean, your arguments, they're fine arguments. What I'm trying to point out is, if you can do something that the other two parties aren't doing, though, as a unifying force, the two major parties will never be for term limits, and the two major parties will never be for campaign finance reform in the way that I'm saying. Poll it. 80% of the public would want it. 90% of the public want to get money out of politics. The only people that don't want to get money out of politics are the people with a lot of money, the millionaires and the corporations.
Exactly.
So
the most successful candidates, I would say, that are populists, that have captivated the public's imagination in the spirit of creating change in our system. You go back, Obama, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Bobby Kennedy. You think one consistent theme throughout them, you can look at the themes, and there were lots of people that jumped between them. One was exactly what you're saying, which is getting corporate money out of politics. It takes different iterations, different candidates express it in different ways, whether it's, defeat the deep state, or whether it's break up the corrupt merger, drain the swamp, break up the corrupt merger between corporation and state, or, Bernie Sanders, talking about the oligarchy. But it's there consistently because, like you said, it's 80 to 90% of people who oppose that. So when we're talking about a unifying platform, I do think it is possible to bring together independents.
But it's okay that we disagree, but I'm an independent voter and none of that resonates with me at all. And actually, I think there was a premise of that. You said populist, the assumption that all independents are part of a populist movement, right?
Let me clarify.
Yeah,
the reason I say populist is because I think that if you're going to build a critical mass with independents that's going to be able to overcome the two parties, you're naturally looking for that base of people, to consolidate the base of people that are opposed to the policies and the parties that are presently ruling.
And also the voters in the Democratic and Republican parties themselves are, and I would speak to the Republican Party. I mean, when we were growing up, the corporations could do almost no wrong, right? The Republican Party and the Republican voters looked to the corporations as sort of the bulwark, the foundation of our economy, that they're working for us. Now the Republican voters themselves see the corporations as the problem because they are the ones now curtailing First Amendment speech. They are the ones who are now Meta, social media companies who are now large corporations. They are now at the forefront of suppressing First Amendment speech. I think there was always sort of within the Democratic electorate probably an anti-corporate movement. I think that is now into the Republican Party now because Republican voters, they are seeing corporations now, gourd their ox now, and I think that now transcends just independent voters. I think that can start building a coalition of independent, Republican, and Democratic voters as one issue. You need more one issue, though, to build a movement. And so that's a start with respect to where we can go with respect to a broad-based movement that could actually succeed.
I agree with that.
But you also need the money.
You do need the money. Because I think that all of us in this room and in the independent movement would probably agree, and probably all of us in this panel would agree that certain structural reforms like opening primaries, ranked choice voting, approval voting, we would all agree on that, right? But my personal conviction, I would love to hear others' takes on this, is that those kinds of process issues are not the ones that ultimately motivate people, right?
Oh, that's absolutely right.
That's a means to an end, right?
Data would bear that out. You're absolutely right about that.
It's the policies that people are trying to get to, whether it's healthcare policy, war, those issues that actually matter to them, that are the ones that I think move people to the voting booth. And I think that in order to create an independent movement or a party that is opposed to the establishment parties that can reach that kind of critical mass, those are the kinds of issues you need to latch onto. And it's not just, I would say corporate money in politics is the best example because it's the kind of the most egregious example that's in our face, and it's become so apparent with multi-billion-dollar elections, Citizens United, both parties just completely owned the revolving door. But I don't think it's the only issue. I think there are others as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was for a balanced budget amendment as a Democrat. It was one of the few that came out in support of a balanced budget amendment when Perot did, and then, Bill Clinton kind of had a lot of pressure from the Republicans. But the amount of money that we spend as a country, you're spending at least $1 trillion more dollars than you're bringing in.
Every 100 days.
Right, and people think like, well, that's not a big deal. It's like, well, if it's inflation and it's driving inflation, that's a cost for our kids and grandkids or whatever. It affects everybody. Now, I get you're in the weeds on this, and I get that. But Republicans used to be, to a person, supportive of a balanced budget amendment. As a matter of fact, it almost passed. You were one vote in the Senate from not passing a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and I supported it. Democrats are like, no, you can't tell us not to spend any money. And I went, every single family in America has a budget, and we all live within this budget. And in times of emergency, you can put stuff on credit. That's what we do in times of emergency. So it's been one of my platforms. It's on my website. I totally support a balanced budget amendment. Now, maybe Republicans do and Democrats don't, but I would convince my constituents that this is in our best interest to adopt this and watch our spending. And if it means cutting military spending, I will have the debate with everybody on, well, we got to have a strong military. It's like 10 times, it's the next 10 countries combined. It's ridiculous.
Ron, I think that what you are saying is a case study for the model that we're trying to advance it forward. You're talking about being a local candidate in Colorado as a state lawmaker who won in an amazing way, but then going and doing the work for your constituencies and also having conversations with your voters, the people who are electing you, that cut through partisanship in those conversations. And part of what we're doing at Forward is saying, we're not adopting a policy platform because we don't want to see a top-down policy platform that comes from a national party. We want to see the Forward Party work together to set policy priorities. Like, these are policies that are really, the way that Arizona voters or that the Arizona Forward Executive Committee may feel about the water issue might be very different than the most pressing issue facing the Forward Party in Michigan, right? You, as an elected official in Colorado who were probably knocking doors of your voters, right? Actually having conversations, actually showing up with people in their everyday lives and really able to communicate to them in a way that where it didn't matter if there was a D or an R at the end of your name, right? Because you were having a one-to-one relationship.
My only fear is the Dems and the Republicans they'll match everything we do. That's what I'm saying. They're going to match us on every level. They're as smart as we are. They've got as tech as we do. What I'm saying is if you don't distinguish who we run from what's already there, the greatest things that Forward is going to say, I've been a part of it, it's like it's not going to, you're going to run your guys, the guys aren't going to win. I want us to win, and I think long-term, the only way that I see, here's what we'll do. We're going to come back to this in a year, and you're going to tell us how your Forward Party candidates across the country, I don't care where they are, how did they do? Did they get 10%? Did they get 24%? What did they get? And if it's low, and you funded them adequately, it means that your premise is wrong. So all I'm saying is that let's come back, and I want to see us this year, every single independent should get double digits, 10%, 11, 12%, as a base. And in 2026, if you're not at 25%, you're doing something wrong. So why don't we just say that to ourselves? You would do something wrong if you're not doing better.
I want to respond, but I don't quite understand what you're getting at.
I'm saying you come back here in a year, and I want to see how your Forward Party candidates did without this unifying theme that makes all Forward Party candidates have something in common.
Let's do that within a year, but I want to take this opportunity, since we've got about 10 minutes left on the panel, to ask, since we've got Paul with us, and you haven't had a chance to share, I think, what a lot of people would like to hear from you. And that is, as the nation's top ballot access attorney, how do you think that ballot access, first of all, what are the problems that you would identify, and how do you think it needs to be remade? How would you remake it?
Scrap it. That's not going to happen. Well, the problem is this: there's a couple Supreme Court cases out there that flatly recognize the Republican Democrats do not. It is okay for them not to have to do what the independents have to do to get on the ballot, because they have won elections in the past. Therefore, they get automatic ballot access, and the Supreme Court has put their imprint on that. So the independents are sort of left to the whim of the state legislatures as to what constitutes a modicum of support, and they set the ballot access number, and that signature total really militates whether or not you get on the ballot. Arizona is atrocious. California is even worse. Michigan is bad. Illinois is bad. Pennsylvania is pretty easy, 5,000 signatures. Georgia, if our lawsuits go forward and it really is a 7,500 number for an independent candidate for statewide as opposed to each individual presidential elector, which was what they pulled out of their hat this time around, that's a reasonable number. So if it's a 10,000 signature number or less, it's doable. But once you start getting into multiples of 20,000, 30,000, and in California, 100,000. Oregon is pretty bad as well. 63,000, right, if I recall? Yeah.
29,000.
Okay. Yeah. Well, with the buffer, you sort of need to get 50 to 60,000 in order to get on the ballot. So we need to start striking down the signature totals in those really bad states. That's very hard to do, because judges sit there and it's like, well, California literally said, well, if you have 1,000 volunteers working the 100 days and you get 1,000 signatures a day, that's not a problem. It's like, really, Judge? Do you really want to be standing out there to get 1,000 signatures to hold on to your your judgeship? I think they would say no. Judges don't have any empathy for independent candidates when it comes to signature totals. What we can show is that there is also case law out there that when there is a lack of independent candidates on a ballot for a certain period of time, that's indicative that the signature total is in fact unconstitutional. We are rapidly getting to that point where there are states where there has not been an independent candidate on a statewide ballot for multiple election cycles, where we can now go in and use Supreme Court case law to say, look, this signature total is too high because no independent has been on that ballot for 5 election cycles. In some situations like California, all the way back to Ross Perot. There has not been an independent candidate on the ballot. So that's one option.
For president.
For president, correct.
Right.
And now with all the other offices, with the top 2 primary system, that's never going to happen. There's never going to be anybody on the general election ballot.
I agree.
And so signature totals are a problem. Ballot access challenges are the other problem. At the very outset, the Democratic Party, clear choice, said we have $100 million to knock off independent candidates wherever they pop their heads up.
And they could have had $1 billion. They would have had whatever it takes to make your life a living hell. That's what I'm saying. They have inexhaustible amount of money.
Inexhaustible. $100 million is essentially inexhaustible as far as I'm concerned. We had about a $5 million budget, and they lost all their challenges except New York and in Georgia. So we were able to push back. What they were also doing this time around, they were taking local ballot access rules and trying to nationalize them. They were saying that if you were nominated by the Forward Party in one state, that you could not be an independent candidate in another state as an independent, because you were somehow now a Forward Party candidate and not an independent candidate. They did that if you were nominated by the AIP in California, though you can't be an independent in Nevada, we beat that back. In Washington State, you have this weird convention terminology. In order to collect signatures, you can't just go out and collect signatures, you have to hold conventions. And those conventions can be out in the streets, and people coming off the ferries, you get them to sign as attendees of your convention. They took that and now are challenging that. Convention means you have to be inside a building you had to get 1,000 people or 100 people inside a building in order to be able to properly call that a convention. We beat that back temporarily, although that issue may be coming ahead. In New Jersey, they said, well, Bobby announced that he was going to be a Democratic candidate. He never filed any papers for any primaries. But they said the mere act of announcing that you're going to be a candidate for another party meant you could not be an independent candidate. They were taking the sore loser law and trying to apply it to independent candidates, even though they had not actually entered any primary election. So they're trying to nationalize, take one state's ballot access rules and use that as a cudgel to disqualify independent candidates, a presidential candidate nationwide. We were able to fight all those back. So there's a lot of work to do on the ballot access front, but the money problem is one of them. It costs money to defend against these challenges. It's not I can't go in pro bono and just use my time for free. You got to fly witnesses in.
Can I ask? Is it public? Is it public record? Don't answer if this is going to make you or the campaign uncomfortable. But people like me want to know. This is part of the reason why I'm not a Democrat anymore, because what they're doing was little d undemocratic. What they were. I don't mind losing in a fair fight. As a matter of fact, I don't mind that at all. What I mind is losing when you change the rules and rig the rules, so there's no reason to play the game because you're not even going to play fair. So what I want to know is, how much did the Kennedy campaign have to spend, if you can tell us this?
About $5 million, right, Nick?
How much?
About $5 million.
In the defense, the ballot access in
About
total
$5
was
million.
probably about $15 million,
Okay, so,
I would say,
so
at
15
least.
mil.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what he raised total. What did he raise?
Tax on independence.
Yeah, what did he raise total so far?
53 million.
Okay, so I just want everybody in the audience to understand this. This is money that could have been spent at least telling the world, this is what I stand for, these are my issues, and if you don't want me, you don't have to vote for me. But instead, you get tripped up at the starting line. You don't even get off the starting line because they change the rules and don't want you to even run. It is little d undemocratic. This is America. What the hell? What the hell?
I have a massively different impression of what's been going on in the past year vis-a-vis AV24 and the Kennedy campaign. It's obviously not the topic of this panel. I have to say that. It's hard because you're the moderator and you
We
have
have
a
a couple
certain
minutes left.
orientation.
You want to please
no,
go
it's
ahead.
all right. Nope,
word.
it's all fine.
The last word is yours.
What I would just say, so I'll say something that I think we can all agree on. There are 500,000 elected offices in this country. 500,000. We have spent a lot of our time on this panel talking about one race, about the presidential race. And what I'm offering to you all, and what I think, whether you're a Kennedy supporter or a different supporter, what I'm offering to you in the forward model, and maybe there's a different vehicle that does this too, so maybe this is just food for thought. If we orient ourselves around doing this every day, around building communities, around building new parties, new spaces, if we orient ourselves around telling the stories of people like Ron, like whoever you were when you first ran for state legislator as a young man, right? Who are those young men and women in your district, right, or in your own districts, whose voices we could elevate? If we can tell those stories, if we can use and build our resources and use our time and treasure to build the infrastructure, to use the stories of those people to interest people in structural reforms, because structural reforms are wonky, right? Structural reforms are wonky. Ranked choice voting, you lose people. We know this from the poll. It's just, thank God most people don't spend their time, thinking about politics all the time, because our whole economy would collapse. Like it would be a nightmare, right? We're a special breed, everyone in this room, right? If we can have a shared vision, whether it's through Forward, whether it's through something you're doing, of day in and day out working to elevate the stories of humans who live in communities, getting someone elected to a school board, to county supervisor. Maybe it's a nonpartisan race, maybe it's not. State legislature, you actually can't run for dog catcher. Andrew Yang likes to say we're running people for dog catcher. There's actually, fun fact, no longer elected dog catcher. That's no longer an elected office anywhere. But if we can do that, then in those battles every 4 years, maybe there will be a lot of independent presidential candidates to choose from, but we are building up that infrastructure so that there is something to fall back on. There's party infrastructure, there are precinct committee people, and it's not a thing that we are, and appreciate what you're saying about the intent to keep it going, but it's not a thing that we are focused on around one race every year. So I would just offer that up. You know, whether for you it's Kennedy or the story of someone in your own backyard who is really compelling, right? Who you could go out and build a little voter file around, maybe start building a state voter file. We would love for you to come do that with us at Forward. We would love for you to come and build infrastructure with us at Forward. But I would just suggest that I would love it for people to consider that model. 500,000 elected offices in the country. And by the way, 70% of them are uncontested. So that is a massive opportunity to get independents into office. So I think, no question, the road is long. We are up against things that are very hard to get over, very big hurdles. We won't solve it overnight. But I think there are these opportunities for small wins. And Ron, I would be happy to come back in a year and tell you the stories of winning Forward candidates, and also tell you the stories of races this cycle where a Forward candidate didn't win, but where they performed well enough on the ballot that we will have new ballot access going into 2025. Yeah.
Perfect. Good.
I look forward to that.
I do too.
Thanks, everyone. I think we might be running up against another panel, so I don't want to keep us long.
Thank you.
Been great talking with you all.